Welcome, everyone. There are still some chairs available in the front, or feel free to relax against the wall and enjoy yourself. Welcome back for those of you who were here last week, and welcome to those of you who are new. My name is Lynn Vartan. I'm the director of A.P.E.X events, and I'm thrilled that you all are here today. Just a little bit of a looking ahead to next week. We're getting ready for homecoming. We want to make sure to let you know that our outstanding alumnus for the year, Julie Castle, will be here next week, and she is the CEO of Best Friends Animal Sanctuary, right in our backyard in Kanab, so the nationally known organization. The CEO of it is an alumnus of SUU, so that's really, really great news. Today we are featuring Al Farrow and Wrath and Reverence. We're going to talk about his artistic process. We're going to talk about his work. We are doing an interview format, which is similar to what we did last week, but I don't want you to think that every week is an interview. It just happens that we have these two back to back. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Sculptor Al Farrow has had numerous solar exhibitions since 1970 and is currently represented by Art Gallery in San Francisco. His work has been in group shows at the Oakland Art Gallery, the San Francisco Arts Commission Gallery, Falkirk Cultural Center in Marin, the San Francisco Art Institute, and the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, among many others. He has over 20 years of bronze casting experience. His work is in many important public and private collections around the world, including the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and the Rosa Preserve in Napa, and other collections in New York, Germany, Italy, and Hong Kong. Please welcome to the stage, Al Farrow.
Thank you for that warm welcome.
Thank you so much for spending the time with us. We were just talking that this is your second visit to Cedar City, and we do want to make sure that everybody is aware that the exhibition is going on right now in SUMA and will continue through October 5th. So if you haven't yet had the chance to see it, please make sure to go over. We will have some images showing throughout the event so you can get a taste of it, but it's nothing like seeing it for real. So thank you so much for being here and spending time with me.
My pleasure.
We're going to do sort of a fun little start-off thing. I have a little icebreaker, word association. So
Okay.
I'd love to ask you, what is the first word that comes to mind? What's in your mind when you hear the following words? And the first is family.
First. Family is always first.
Ah, okay. And how about travel?
Travel is exciting, except when you're getting old.
Well, okay. But you travel quite a bit, I understand.
I do, and I'm 75, and I'm feeling it when I travel.
Ah, I see.
When I work, I don't have any age.
Ah, oh, I love that. Oh, that's great. How about technology?
Technology is great, but it has pitfalls.
Yeah. Okay. And then how about teamwork?
Teamwork is essential.
Ah, okay. Do you work a lot with others? Because we think of the artist as being sort of solitary.
I'm mostly solitary. I like, a lot of artists spend most of their time alone. But as I've gotten older, and my projects have gotten bigger and bigger, I've started hiring assistants. So like right now, I have a part-time assistant 3 days a week, and it really helps move the projects forward.
Ah, okay. And the last of my little word association, how could I not ask, word association with art?
Art is one of the most important things in life. It's how we interpret cultures. It's a reflection of our own culture that we live in, and it's multifaceted. But cultures from the past, we dig them up and we interpret them through the art that's been left behind, because most of the rest is destroyed.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. That's a great way to sort of just get a little snippet and a little taste going in. I've kind of structured this to talk a little bit about your background, a little bit about the artistic process in general as it means to you, and then of course get into the work and the exhibition, and then perhaps a few miscellaneous things about the future. So just so that everybody sort of gets a sense of our trajectory. My first background question is, when did you know that this is what you wanted to do with your life? How did you get started?
Art was always part of my life. Always, as a young child. And I grew up in New York City, and in the time, that was the 1940s, they separated talented kids and put them in special classes. And so from the age of 10 on, I was given special art classes through the rest of elementary school and middle school.
Was there a moment, I mean, that you remember making the choice in terms of career path, or was it just kind of always an essential part of everything you did?
Well, no, this is a complicated one, because I'm from a family of 6 brothers, and my 2 older brothers were extraordinarily talented, and I grew up in their shadow. And all the teachers they had, I got later, and there were all these prejudgments. So I made a choice, career choice, when I was choosing a high school, because New York City at that time had all sorts of choices to be a mechanic or a carpenter or whatever. And I made a choice not to follow art because my brothers were so advanced. So I went into an engineering high school.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And then when I got out of high school, I was working as a draftsman. And so I chose a completely different career path, but the art thing wouldn't leave me alone. It was inside me, and it was something I couldn't even identify, but it was bothering me constantly until finally I just secretly, because I didn't want my family to see what I was doing, I went out and bought paints and canvases and stuff, and would paint at home, but alone, and I would never show my family or anybody what I was doing because I was still intimidated by my brothers.
Oh my gosh, that's I didn't know that part of the story. Do you have any particularly memorable moments, early memories about your creative expression that link to you? Anything that stands out from any particular piece or any particular moment that you hold on to still?
Are you referring to childhood or?
Yeah, let's go with childhood.
Well, the family I grew up in was economically deprived.
Okay.
And so we didn't have a lot of toys and things like that, but we always had paper and pencils and crayons and scissors and glue, and we did scrapbooks and stuff, and and we created drawing games. So like after dinner, we would sit at the kitchen table, which was the only space that could hold us all, and one brother would make up a mark on a paper and pass it to the next, and then we'd create something out of that and pass it to the next until we worked it to death. And then the next brother would start something, and we had that and many other drawing games that we just created. And what that did was it made us all develop a beautiful hand-eye coordination and ability to interpret lines and forms, and so we all became creative people.
Oh wow, that's really cool. How about the social commentary aspect? I know we'll get into that over the course of the conversation. Yeah. Was that always a part of the early dialogue for you, or is that something that emerged, as you matured in life?
I actually chose to become an artist as a career full-time and commit myself to that life to become a social commentary artist.
I see.
I knew it wasn't the best of choices because it's not a popular art form for people to buy and live with.
Right.
But the financial side was never my concern. It was my biggest and deepest concern was always to actually express my feelings about what I see going around me, and I seem to have been born with a critical mind, and I'm a critical thinker, and so I criticized everything. So eventually, during the Vietnam War era, is when I really decided to commit myself completely to art and to try to, make a point, make a difference. I now know you can't really make much of a difference, but you can try.
Right. So the activism, I think I read, was sort of a thread. I mean, this is what you're talking about. If you go into a little bit more detail on the creative mind, the activism part of things, you found that maybe other ways of demonstrating your activism weren't as satisfying or weren't as effective.
Yeah, well, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was a political activist, and I went to lots of demonstrations against the war and things like that. But the efforts of people were being denied. The reporting on the news for covering an event would always diminish our attendance and expand the opposition attendance. And it was really frustrating to see that we were being, not being really looked at seriously. And so I decided to stop being a public protester and protest in a private way that can be put into public, and at least hopefully try to affect how people think or feel about something.
And in the artistic realm, social commentary, social activism, social protest, do those all mean the same thing to you, or are those different paths?
Well, there's a multiple of paths within that. But I was concerned not with just anti-war and things like that. I was concerned with how cultures, the indigenous cultures all over the world, were being destroyed by the introduction of cash economies, and so I created this African series that addresses. I was using African people as sort of a symbol of all the indigenous cultures, and I was trying to get people to see how introducing weapons and cash economies and stuff changed their entire lifestyle. And so I've even done a sculpture of a 12-year-old boy with a AK-47, and this was done in the 80s, a long time ago than what we see it now. But in those days, people didn't see it that much. It wasn't in the news. But it really, a little boy with a gun like that can destroy a whole village and kill the culture. And so the cultures were really being destroyed. They didn't make their own fabrics anymore. They didn't make their own pottery because they had plastic and aluminum pots. And so ways of life were changing, and that really disturbed me. And so I decided to make commentary about it. I'm sure it was misunderstood.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, it wasn't well received.
I want to ask you, I have a whole thread of that I'd love to get into a little bit when we talk about the exhibition that's on right now, about response and how things have been received. But before that, I'd love to just kind of delve a little deeper into the artistic process. And now, especially with the longevity of your career, how would you define creativity? What does creativity mean to you today?
For me, it means taking something from the imagination and bringing it into reality. The creative process is in everyone. We don't all pay attention to it, and we don't always respond to the stuff that's inside us asking to come out, but some of us are sensitive to that and do it. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I just want to know kind of your thoughts on what creativity means to you today, because that probably has changed your feelings about creativity. I mean, I know as an artist, my feelings about the creative process have adjusted and changed as my career.
Yeah, I think we all evolve, and mine has certainly evolved, but I still think the creative process is just that. You start with a thought form. As soon as you think of something in your imagination, that's the first aspect of bringing it into reality. It has its first form as a thought. If you choose to act on it, make a drawing, a sketch, you've got closer to bringing it to reality. If you take that sketch and then decide to make a sculpture from it, you've further advanced it. And so it continues like that until it's real, until you have the object, the painting, the song, whatever it is that you're creating. But it all starts with a thought.
With the gem of an idea.
Yeah.
Great. What is a typical creative day like for you? What's a day in the life of your creative process?
Oh, I get up 7:30. I watch an hour of cable news.
Really?
It wakes up my brain because I'm a really deep sleeper. I have no problem sleeping. So my brain wakes up. I drink coffee while I'm watching this news. Then I get up and have breakfast and shower. And by 11 o'clock, I'm at my studio. And I work until 7:30. And go home and hang out with my wife and have dinner. And that's my typical day now. But when I was younger, I would work much longer hours. There were times I worked 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day. There were even periods with deadlines that I'd work 20 hours a day. And on a continuous basis.
Wow.
I felt like I had a really late start in the art career because I didn't get seriously committed and get into a good studio till I was about 30. And so I felt like I had a lot of time to make up. So I put in enormous hours. So I would come home for dinner, family, always sacred. And so we'd share our experiences and things like that. And then when I got my kids to bed, I'd go back to the studio, work all night, be home in time to prepare breakfast for the kids, get them off to school, then I'd take a nap. That's how it used to be. Now, 8 hours a day, I'm really tired at the end of an 8-hour day.
Right. Do you feel that you now need to still continue to nurture your creative energy? Is it a thing that you care for on a day-to-day basis? Your sort of your creative energy, or is it something that's just flowing all the time?
It's totally natural. It just comes out. I think everybody's creative. I think we just don't all act on our creativity. All your thoughts, again, are the beginning of something. It's just where else, what more energy do you put on those thoughts? A lot of people have great creative thoughts and they let it go, and they just don't act on it. So it disappears, but it's always there.
Yeah.
And I think we all have it.
Yeah, great. Well, I'd love to turn a little bit, continuing the artistic conversation and talking about your work. Do you have a tool, something that you absolutely can't live without in your studio? And it could be a talisman of sorts, or it could be a specific item. Do you have something that is just absolutely essential to your art making?
My mind.
That's an amazing one. Great. Okay, cool. And do you feel that thrown into any environment then, just with your mind, you could make your art?
Yeah, I'm always making things in my head. If I'm in the airport waiting and I've got a delay and all that, I just close my eyes, block out the world, and I start allowing thoughts to come to fruition. Some people call it meditation and stuff. I don't meditate in a formal way like people who practice meditation. It just comes natural to me. I just block out the world and allow the thoughts. When I first was married, my wife would come in a room and I'd be sitting there, total blank, not moving. She'd go, "What are you doing?" Because I'd be there for a long time.
Yeah.
I go, thinking. And this is something I always do. If I have time, I just think, and I don't apply thinking. I allow the flow of that mental energy. And you catch and grab what you want, and you let the rest go. But that's something I've always done and still do.
Okay, we have a lot of art students in the room, and I was curious if you have any advice for them to develop this. I mean, I know that you mentioned that it comes very naturally to you, but how would you advise young apprentices or young artists to develop that discipline or that sense of curiosity? I mean, can it be? Do you have any advice?
I think you need to believe in yourself. When I taught for a while in a college, I would tell the students that just before a critique, I said, "Listen, your own mother will lie to you about how good your art is.
You're amazing." Right.
Yeah, and so I would say in our critique, we have to let all that go. We have to have honesty, but delivered kindly. In other words, you could say, "I hate it," and it's ugly, but you got to find a nice way to say it. But you're still delivering the same message. And I think that it's essential that you believe in yourself. If all your friends and your parents think what you're doing is not attractive, not saleable, not whatever, you still have to do what you feel you should do. I think you need to be true to your own spirit, your own creative source. And it's deep in us. And if you don't believe in yourself and you act on other people's feedback and create things like that, there's a slight insincerity starting right at that point. And the deepest sincerity of your efforts comes from believing in what you're doing. And you're going to get, artists are going to get 95% rejection no matter what. I don't care what art form you're in, whether you write or sing or dance or create visual art. You're going to get at least 95% rejection in the early years. And if you don't believe in yourself, you're going to shrivel.
Right.
And a lot of people do. And a lot of wonderful talent goes on the wayside because they can't handle all that feedback. If you early on try to get a sense of self and believe in that what you're doing is correct for you, and you just go forward, you always have the opportunity later to destroy it, after it's come into its fruition. But believing in oneself is so important. And my story about, being intimidated by my older brother's talent is an example of that. I didn't believe in myself when I was young. I believed in my brothers. You see, I thought, wow, they're so good. I can never do that, But as soon as I let all that go, and after secretly doing art for a while, I finally, came to believe in myself and proudly showed what I do. And sure, you get rejection. I mean, trying to get a gallery show in the early career is 99% rejection. So you have to get tough. You got to toughen yourself against all that. Yeah. And that belief is what protects you.
Great, thank you. That is great advice. I mean, we are finding ourselves talking a lot about resilience and confidence and strength, and so that goes right along with that. Thank you for that. This is a bit of perhaps a strange question. Sometimes with artists, it's fun to ask, if you were one of your works of art, or a character in your work of art, but one of your works of art, which one would you be and why?
Well, right now, in a different time I would answer it differently, but right now I would choose to be the cathedral that's in this show.
Yeah.
And the reason is I would get to travel a lot. I would have lots of people around me to discuss with.
Right.
And things like that.
Oh, that's cool to think of it as, I love that. Great,
well,
thank
I see it as one of my most successful pieces.
Is it your favorite? Do you choose favorites?
I don't really choose favorites, but it's amongst what I consider my best efforts.
Okay. On the opposite side of it, we've talked a lot about the positive influence of creativity. What would you say has been the biggest opposing force that you have encountered in your personal creative journey?
Lack of money.
Ah, okay.
I was never financed. It was hard to get people to believe in me. When I got my first show, I happened to be offered 2 shows, one in Germany and one in San Francisco, and I had no money at all. And I actually approached all my family, I approached all my friends. Nobody believed in me enough to loan me money. I went to philanthropists and organizations. I found one that did help me some, but it wasn't enough. So I came up with a plan to give a free bronze sculpture to everyone who would loan me $2,000.
Wow.
And the sculptures were worth about $2,000.
Wow.
So basically, I still had to pay the money back.
Yeah.
But the deal said it was an open-ended loan that I couldn't guarantee a date of payment.
I see.
And that's why the incentive of giving them a free sculpture. So I raised enough money and gave a lot of sculpture away.
That's clever though, wow.
That's creativity.
That is. And then when you begin to create, and we'll get into this when we talk about how this body of work came to be, do you have a finished product in mind?
I always have a vision, but the vision is a vague vision. It's not a picture. It's more of a feeling.
Oh.
So I have a sense of what I want to accomplish. In this body of work, it could be, a particular form, but I keep my mind open to anything that comes along from the inner voice to say, try this or change that. And I'm not afraid to change it afterwards either. I think we're all, limited in the moment. And so as we develop a sculpture, for example, along the way, the inner voice speaks. So when I was doing figurative art, for example, I would start a sculpture knowing where I was kind of aiming, but along the way, something inside me would say, well, twist that or bend this, and I would do that. Always knowing that I could always start the original idea again, and it would turn into a whole series. And so I would get 8, 9, 10 sculptures out of one idea that would become a series that all relate, but they're all different.
Related to that, do you know the exact moment when a work is finished? I mean, is it a hard stop, or does it?
No, that's one of the hardest things for a visual artist, is to know when it's finished. And when I was teaching, I would always, bring that subject up, that when your inner voice says it's done, it's done.
Okay.
And so an example would be, I was working on what I call my fashion model series when I was working in bronze, and I was developing this figure, and it still had armature sticking out of one leg. The lower leg wasn't finished. I had not even put the arms on yet, but my idea had everything to do with wrapping fabric, strips of fabric on the sculpture. So I was trying it out, and it came out so good that I knew if I undid it to finish the figure, I would never be able to wrap it so beautifully again.
I see.
So I called it finished, and I cast it, and interestingly, everybody related to that sculpture from that series more than any of the others that were all completed and made the fullest statement. But that edition, which was an edition of 6 bronzes, sold out immediately, and none of the others sold for quite a long time. So it's really interesting. If you follow that inner voice, it really works. We all have some kind of inner knowledge. It's not necessarily fully conscious, and we often disallow it, and I allow it. I really allow that.
Thinking about the finished, not finished over a body of time, looking at what you've created in the past, is there anything that you would change today? And that could be something specific or something overarching.
No, I don't think so. I wouldn't change anything. We all make mistakes. We all take the wrong path occasionally, but those are learning experiences, and if you learn something out of it, there's no loss. I always see, even the worst experiences, my philosophy in life has become find the silver lining in every experience. So even the worst experiences, if it's a learning experience, it's not a total loss because you've gained something. And so I focus on the gain, not the loss.
I see, okay. I have just one last question about sort of the process in general, and then I'd love to get into the exhibition some. One of the threads to kind of carry over from our discussion last week with the writer that we had here is that we've talked quite a bit. The dialogue is very open right now on campus about anxiety, depression, and I was curious if there is any relationship in your life between creativity and suffering, or creativity and depression.
I was depressed before I became an artist.
I
haven't been depressed since.
Okay.
I work out all my issues in my work, and when I was teaching, I used to encourage my students to really work out their problems in the work, even if it's ugly, because sometimes your thoughts and feelings are ugly, and you can kill it later. But it's something that helps you process, and that brings you to a healthy place.
Okay. Great, thank you.
I don't think I addressed the whole question. Could you repeat it?
So what is the relationship, if any, between your creativity and suffering?
Okay, suffering is the part I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that creative people have to suffer to become
Yes. Right.
Suffering is not noble. It is just not.
It's just suffering.
It's just suffering. And you do not have to struggle or suffer to become an artist. You
heard it here. You heard it here first.
You don't have to. You know, they have all these stories about Irish writers. They all have to get drunk to write. It's not real.
Right.
Maybe some individuals feel that way, and maybe it even works for some people. But it isn't a necessity. You don't have to be depressed or struggle or suffer. There's actually no nobility in that at all.
Okay.
You can do it without that.
Okay, great. Thank you for the advice. Turning to the body of work that's in the exhibition that's titled Wrath and Reverence. I know you've told the story, but I would love if you could share with those of us who don't know it how this body of work came to be. Was there a specific instance that sort of brought that muse to you?
Yes, there was. I was in a transitional period in my artwork, and since my bronzes and the social commentary stuff I was doing was definitely not selling at all, and I was really broke, and I was thinking, well, you know, it's time for change. So I was looking to change, and I had experimented early in my career with carving wood, carving stone, and I thought I would like to go back to carving. So I thought going to Italy for a month and look at carvings would give me some juice, you know?
Right.
And so I went to Italy and looked at every museum and church I came across, and they have amazing art in every church. In a lower chapel, Medici Chapel in Florence, I came across a silver and crystal reliquary about this big with a finger in it. And it just immediately, literally triggered the whole concept for this body of work. And I didn't think I was going to create a body of work out of it. I was still thinking about carving. But I made one or two, maybe three pieces, and I realized that this was so loaded, had so much potential that I hadn't even begun to explore. When I saw that finger, I immediately thought of a trigger finger, about to pull the trigger, so I always bend the finger. I thought of putting guns and bullets as the housing, because in the Renaissance and those eras, in the Middle Ages, they would make the reliquaries out of gold and silver and put jewels and stuff all over it. What's precious today? And guns are so precious to so many people today, and bullets and stuff. I thought, well, the bullets can be the jewels and the guns can be the supports like columns. And so that all was instant when I saw that. So I immediately went out and got a sketchbook and started sketching ideas. By the time I got home, I completely didn't want to carve. I didn't even continue looking for carvings. I kept looking for more reliquaries. And so there's one chapel in Florence that has probably over 100 reliquaries. It's like a museum, but it's in a church. And so it isn't a museum itself. But I would sketch all those things and come home and see how can I translate it? Because that's what this work is translating. It's like translating languages, but they're visual languages. So I'm translating architecture into armament. But initially I was only doing reliquaries, and it wasn't architectural, really. They were just little housings and boxes and things like that, made out of guns and bullets. But I started soon after realizing that I was just dealing with Catholic imagery, and I needed to be more inclusive, because the concepts behind it, had to do with, it's more universal, and it should be including all religions who were not, all religions that had some part in war.
Right.
And so I expanded, I really searched my mind for what kind of thing can I introduce that would do that, because Islam and Judaism doesn't have relics as Catholicism does, and neither do Protestants. So I came up with the idea that architecture would symbolize the religion. And so then that allowed me to include all the other main monotheistic religions.
And I have read that this is a continual expansion. You may be looking to even looking to including Buddhism or Hinduism. Is that still the case?
Yeah, actually, this is my last show on a tour that's been going for 4 years in different museums around the country. And once I've got everything packed away, I'm going to start my research for Buddhism and Hindu.
Interesting.
And so that will be my next effort.
And do you think that will still stay in the architectural realm?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay, interesting. Well, we'll stay tuned for that. Santo Guero is a main presence in the work, and I was wondering if you could share with us the story of who that is and what that means.
Santo Guero is a made-up saint. I really try very hard to be respectful of all the religions and all people's choices. And so I didn't want to insult or denigrate the religion or the people who adhere to those. And so I thought, if I choose a saint, it has to be a fictitious one so that nobody is personally offended. And so I wanted to do something about the saint of war. And so in all the Romance languages, and I was learning Italian at the time, so all the Romance languages, the word for war is in the feminine tense. And so I wanted to make it masculine. So I changed guerra into guero. And so it became Santo Guero. And so that's how that came to be.
So when this saint is included in the work, I mean, do you feel that you are paying homage to the saint? I mean, what is your relationship to that saint in the work?
Well, the saint is really a fabrication of me. I mean, it's my mind, my thoughts, my feelings expressed. And so, I mean, I used different language forms. Sometimes I used the French form or the Portuguese or the Spanish. But ultimately I realized, nobody cares and nobody even understands what I'm talking about with playing with languages. So I'm just going to call it Santo Guero for everybody. Okay. And so he became the character of my work.
Oh, okay. Great. I wanted to talk a little bit about what goes into making these pieces. They are extremely elaborate, and I read some other interviews that talked about some of the water cutting and computer things and some of the pieces that you've sourced and found from World War I. I wonder if you could talk to the mechanics and the pieces themselves and just the spectrum of that process of making them.
Okay, well, first of all, the kind of art is assemblage, meaning we assemble things, and it's found object art is another name. And so accumulating, when you do assemblage, you have to have a lot of choice. And so you have to have lots of stuff because not everything's going to fit the purpose that you're building or be in the correct scale, or it could be too long, too short, too fat, whatever. And so you got to have a lot of choice. So I had to start accumulating. Accumulating this material is not easy, particularly in California because they're very restrictive in gun stuff.
Right.
And so I would go to Arizona and Nevada, places not too far to drive to, and go to gun shows and things like that, and accumulate, cartridge shells, guns that I could afford, things like that. And sometimes I would meet people who would have like a warehouse, and they would have all these old World War II things that no longer functioned, and I would just, buy everything I could afford to buy. And so now my studio looks like an arsenal. There's racks and racks of guns and bullets and shells and stuff every size. And so I have an ease of choice. I haven't even shopped in 6 years.
Oh, in 6 years? Wow.
I have so much stuff.
That's quite a stockpile.
So now, I'm getting kind of old, and so I thought, I can't go spending tens of thousands more. Let's work with what you've got, And so I just keep making things. I mean, I still have to buy steel and welding rods and that stuff, but for armament, I haven't had to do much shopping at all.
Yeah.
Only if I run out of a certain bullet, then I'll order more, you know.
While we're on that, I know that you've attended so many gun shows, and I wonder about the transformative experience that may have had on you. I think in the gallery there's also an interview that says where you begin to compare gun collectors to art collectors.
Yeah. Well, when I started this whole thing, I grew up in New York City where nobody had a gun. I didn't know a single person with a gun. Nobody I knew had shooting experience except if they were in the military. And I had not been in the military, so I had no experience at all. What was the question?
About the gun shows.
Okay, the gun shows. Yeah,
gun
so when I started
collectors.
out, I was very anti-gun, and I was a little bit afraid of the gun culture people. They looked scary to me, you know? And so I was really sheepish and all that, and I didn't have a vocabulary even. I didn't know the different calibers. I didn't know anything about it. And so it was a learning curve, a long learning curve. And I had friends who were shooters who would give me information. And so it was a long evolution. But ultimately I came to understand, and it didn't take too long, that the criteria for collecting guns is the same as the criteria for collecting art, where rarity, condition, and provenance are the three most important issues. So a good example would be a gun, a pistol from, say, the middle 1800s. If Custer owned that gun and you could prove it, that gun would auction for over $1 million.
Right.
But that same gun made in the same year, the next number in the production line would maybe get $3,000 at most. And so those are the things that drive prices up, the rarity, the condition. If it's in rotten condition, it's gonna, affect the price. But that's the same thing in art, whether it's a painting or a sculpture or a print. It could be as rare as possible, but maybe there's nobody who wants it.
Right.
But if there are people who want it and there's an audience for it, the price will continue to rise because of its rarity and again, condition. Provenance, by the way, for those who don't know what it is the history of the object. Who owned it, what shows it might have been in, if it's a work of art. All of that history adds to the value for the collector mind.
And are the oldest pieces that you know of in your body of work from World War I? I know there are some specific pieces from some specific battlefields that you have in your work.
Yeah. There's a piece in the show called Burnt Church, and I'm using 3 rifles from the battlefield of Verdun, which is one of the most famous battles where there were over 1 million casualties and over 8 million pieces of ordnance thrown at each other. It was really incredible, and absolutely nothing was gained at the end of this battle. And so there's an absurdity there, but it is really famous, and they have monuments. There's one monument called an ossuary on the battlefield that is just full of bones of people who died there. They're not identified. It's just thousands and thousands and thousands of bones piled up, and you can look into it. It's really effective.
Yeah.
But the antiquity isn't as important to me as the architecture of the weapon. So earlier guns were designed, just like earlier machines are all designed, they're so beautiful. Contemporary stuff is all modern and angular. It doesn't have the curves and the steps. And so I really prefer to work with older munitions than the newer ones, but I sometimes work with newer things. But I think, does that cover that question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I could go on for
No, I've got more.
Okay.
I would like to foray just a bit in as gently as possible into the topics of violence and religion and the relationship there. I have a quote from a 2015 interview where you said that there is a relationship to think about between violence and religion.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could talk a bit about that.
Well, I think I have a lot of interests aside from art. I'm really involved in archaeology, anthropology, and history, and to a certain extent religious history since doing this.
Yes, of course.
It appears to me in the things I've read and studied that religion has been used to get people to fight with each other. It's not the religion itself, it's just a tool that leadership uses to get people upset with other. They create them to be different, even if they're really not. A good example would be the Shiite and Sunni situation in the world, which is a fight that's been going on since about the grandson of Muhammad, which would be about 750 AD, until now, and it's a continuing thing. This recent Saudi bombing is a proxy war between Sunni and Shia, and it's ongoing, and it's not about to end until there is some kind of final solution, or both sides decide to be peaceful. But it goes as far back in history as you can imagine. One of the earliest examples I can think of is Socrates. Everybody knows he took hemlock, killed himself. But why did he kill himself? He was about to be killed because he was preaching against the religion, which was the pantheon of gods in the Greek religion. And so he knew he was about to be assassinated, as others had been before him, and so he decided to take his life. But they don't talk about the religious aspect.
Right, that's true.
When most people talk about that era and his so-called heroic effort, he was going to die either way. So,
what is your long-term desire for the impact of particularly this body of work? Your long-term goals?
Well, I would hope that a lot of my work would end up in museums so that the public would have access to it. I think private ownership is nice and it's fun. I'm a collector myself. But I think a lot of the work I do doesn't really sit well in a home. I think it sits well in a museum. And one of the reasons museums are there is for the public to access. And I love the idea that people of different time frames and experience might encounter these works and interpret it from their perspective.
How about from the social commentary standpoint? What is your desire for visitors to take away the message?
I'm not trying to deliver any message at all.
Okay.
I'm trying to provoke people into thinking. That's really my major effort for all the work I've done, is to get people to think. I'm aware that Hollywood, TV, and all sorts of other media are pre-digested things. Most people, if you're a thinking person, know what's going to happen once they open the store. You know who's going to die. You know who's going to get killed twice. It's so formulaic. That kind of offends me. It's like they're dealing with us as if we're all 13 years old or less. I want people to think. What they think is not that important to me, just that they do think. So when they're confronted with my work, I'm showing juxtapositions of things that are not natural, and that should immediately start thought process. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is get people to think. Now they can think, one person can interpret one way and another way, and in my opinion, they're both correct. They're correct for who they are and from their experience. And so I'm not trying to lead them to any conclusion. I just want to kind of lead them to themselves. Yeah. So in relation to religion and religious teachings, there's a lot of hypocrisy in what actually goes on and what's been written as the ideal for religions. And we all have our book that's our book, but most are not really living by that book. And so I'm hoping people will think enough to even consider where do they sit in between those juxtapositions. Again, it doesn't matter to me whether they decide this or that, nothing specific. Just that they would think. A lot of contemporary life doesn't allow you to really think freely. And I'm a proponent of that.
Thank you. A lot of people have asked, they would love to know about the feedback that you've gotten, or criticism or backlash perhaps. Can you talk about what the response to the work, because it's been all over the US, it's been all over.
It's interesting. I'm amazed. I think it's 99.5% positive response. I think it's 0.5% or less negative response. It's just, it's amazing to me. Most art, if you go to any of the great museums all around the world, you look at people looking at the art, and I've done this. Most people spend 10 seconds or less looking at a masterpiece and then moving on to the next. A lot of people who've gone all the way to Europe to look at art, they want to get the whole museum in.
Right.
That's really not that important. What's important is to really enjoy and interpret and analyze the stuff that really touches you. So when you come across something that just touches you, give it time. That's so essential. Most people don't do that. My work has a really different effect. People I've watched from a distance when my cathedral is at the De Young Museum, which is where it lives. There's always a crowd around it. And people are from all over the country, all over the world visiting, because it's a really major museum. They're compelled to talk, and they start talking to each other. I have not seen strangers talk to each other about art in front of a piece of art anywhere. I've seen teachers addressing classes all over Europe. They really take kids to museums all the time. We don't. But kids learn to analyze and interpret. I can tell some really nice anecdotes about that. Would you like?
Well, we are.
You have time?
I have a couple more questions that I want to ask, but we will be on the radio together. So I would love to get into that a little bit more later today, if that's okay.
That would be great.
That's just great to hear. That's very interesting to hear what the reaction and response has been. I think some people would expect that there would be a little more backlash, perhaps, with the sensitive topics.
Not at all. And what's most interesting is that people really have dialogue. They really start talking. So I think I feel really successful in my effort to get people to think, and it's way beyond my expectations or hopes that they do what they do. I found, quite by accident, a niche that is beyond my wildest dreams of having people think and talk and communicate and spend time and then come back. A lot of people don't come back to a work of art.
Yeah.
Some people go, I've watched like in a group show, people look at everything first, and then if they found something they really want to look at again, they go back to it.
Yeah.
My work has always been the one they go back to. And that pleases me enormously.
Very rewarding.
Yes.
Just a couple last questions I love to ask. Again, thinking of the students in the room and as they go off into their lives and careers, as you were building your career, is there anything you really wish you had known? Thinking about like the gems of advice to pass along. What do you wish that you had known as a college student that would affect perhaps our students today?
Perseverance is probably the most important thing, drive and perseverance. I've known a lot of artists that were major talents, but they didn't have that drive that says, I'll never give up. I've had many shows in galleries that sold absolutely nothing. It can be depressing, but I didn't let it depress me. I allow myself a week to feel bad, but after that I go, well, if they think that was bad, wait till they see the next one. And I would use it as a springboard into my next body of work.
Great.
And that's been something I've done consistently along. And I have, had a lot of no sale shows. So a lot of people would give up. But it's that perseverance. But that's only part of it. The drive is the most important element. There are artists who have so much drive and so little talent. They're successful.
Yeah.
They're successful.
Yes, I know.
Now, they may not be remembered into the future.
True.
But in their time, they're successful because they present themselves and they're so driven, they're so, strong about what they're doing and putting it on people in the world. They succeed.
Yeah.
But I think the most important element is your drive and your perseverance.
Okay, I love those two words. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm a big fan of those two words. My last question is, what does the future hold for you? I know you mentioned the forays into Buddhism and Hinduism, but sort of in the grander scale of your artistic life and your goals for the future, what does the future hold for you?
I'm not sure. I never want to retire.
All right.
Because I love working.
Yeah.
And it's an important part of my everyday. The future, it's so uncertain. I'm up in the air about a lot of things. I know that my life is finite. I know that my strength is finite. I'm far less, I can't work the long hours I used to and all that. But I'm dealing with all that comfortably. And so I'm gradually slowing down. I don't think I'll ever stop until I die. I'll probably die in my studio. Just because I spend so much time there.
Could be worse. It could be much worse.
my career is so far beyond my wildest dreams, hopes, and expectations. Growing up in a poor family and in the slums of New York, my dreams were, if ever, to become an artist, just to be that.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think I'd ever see my work in a museum in my lifetime.
Wow.
I did have the fantasy as I was developing that maybe when I'm dead, some pieces might end up in a museum.
Wow.
But so my experience has been that I'm in a lot of museum collections now, and I've been showing in a variety of museums, and my whole career is way beyond my wildest expectations. So I don't have goals. I mean, I've surpassed them all.
Yeah.
And so, I just want to keep going.
Great.
That's it.
Well, that's a perfect way to end, with the future of keeping going. So I would like to say thank you so much for the time that you spent with us, and thank you all for being here. We do have a few copies of the book, Wrath and Reverence, outside, and Al will be around if you have some questions that I didn't perhaps get to and you'd like to ask. He will also be on the radio with me on Thunder 91.1 at 3 o'clock today, and then in the Levitt Center, I believe at 5 o'clock. I think that's right. Mary can shout out if I think it's 5 o'clock. So there's more opportunities to interact with our great artist today. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your insight, and thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to share.